Welcome to Lesson 11 of Algebraic Concepts, Properties of Real Numbers, Part 2. So you may have to go back and watch one of the properties videos. This is Part 2, so it may be back in Numbers and Operations. All right, so here's our objective. Here's some vocabulary, some rules and notes for you. So now, substitute a number for n to make each statement true. Identify the property used. Okay, so let's figure out what we have going on here. So first thing we have to do is obviously figure out what we got going on here. So when I see a number outside of a parenthesis and I see two numbers being added or subtracted, that makes me immediately think of distribution. So 7 times 10 plus 7 times 1. Now we look for the missing number. So we have 7 times 10 on the other side, and what's missing? N. Well, n must equal 1, because you will have equals 7 times 10 plus 7 times 1. And since n is 1, what property is being used? Well, this would be the distributive property. And now the distributive property is an important property to remember for algebra. You're going to use it a lot in solving all kinds of problems. So if you don't remember any of the other properties, distributive is one, and there are probably 2 or 3 that you're definitely going to use. So please go back and watch some of them earlier properties of numbers videos. They may be back in numbers and operations. Okay, substitute a number for n to make each statement true. So we got 8 plus n equals 9 plus 8. So this must be 8 plus 9 because that's the missing number. All right, and then what number is this? What property is this? This is the commutative property of addition, commutative. The word commute. People commute back and forth to work. That means to go back and forth. You commute on a train and a car. You go to work, you come back. You go to school, you come back home. You go to the store, you come back home. You commute. So numbers can be switched around in order, especially when adding and multiplying. You can switch the numbers around and you will not change the answer. This is a very important property for algebra. Okay, example 3, what do we have here? 3 plus 4 plus 8. And what's missing? 3 plus n must equal 4. Okay, so again, this, if you notice, the grouping has changed. And when a grouping has changed, we call that associate. So this is the associative property. You can change the grouping. You're going to use the associative property in algebra. So that's why I feel like this video is important to watch. And there's one more property that you're going to use a lot that we will solve in the problems. So this is the last example. I will see you at the end of the video for the recap. Okay. Substitute a number to make n true. 7n equals 1. So what makes 7 1? So obviously you have to multiply it by its inverse. And this is the inverse property of multiplication. So inverse of multiplication. Let's just write it all out. Since we are multiplying. Whenever a number is next to a letter, you have to multiply. That's the order of operation. Or next to a parentheses or two letters are next to each other is multiplication. And the inverse means we're dealing with multiplication. It means the upside down of a number. We know that all whole numbers can be made rational if you put them over 1 or you put a decimal point at the end of them. You can do this to any integer or a whole number or counting number and make it a rational number. And this is important to know. And now the inverse, we take this one and just flip it upside down. And now a times 1 over a becomes 1 for any number except 0 because we cannot divide by 0. Okay, substitute a number. So 9 times 1 over 9 equals, well, anytime you multiply by the inverse of a number, you get 1. And so this, again, is the inverse property. And so now you've seen this two ways, the inverse property of multiplication. The addition has an inverse property, and so let me put that in a different color. So if you're adding a number, and you add its opposite, you will get 0. That's the inverse property of addition. But when you're dealing with the inverse property of multiplication, your answer is going to be 1. And we're going to be using this a lot when we get to solving equations. That's the property that is mostly used outside of distribution. Okay, so n times 12 equals 12. So 1 times 12 equals 12. Whenever you use the same number, that is called the identity property. And this is the identity property of multiplication. Which states that any number, multiplication, any number times 1 is the same number. There is an identity property of addition, but we're not dealing with that. We are going to be using the identity property of multiplication. And why do we use that? When you see a number like n or an expression like n plus 3x plus 2n plus 3, like we saw in the last video, the identity property tells us, explains to us that we can put a 1 here because 1 times n is still n, but now we use the identity property to combine like terms, as you can see there. So this is why we use these properties. You will see these come up. I'll try to remember to point out the property used in future videos, but I may forget. So I just want to put this caveat in here so that you come back and watch this video when we get into other videos. So thanks for watching. If you like what you saw, subscribe to this channel, and I hope to see you on future videos.